All right, Krishna, everyone, this is acyuta-bhava, and today we're going to take a look at another great question that came in from all of you who watch my Bhakti channel. This one is on the nature of romantic love, soulmates, twin flames. Do such things exist? What are their purpose, and how do they relate to the goal of Bhakti, or the path of loving service and loving relationship with God? So great question. I'm going to read the email that I got. Hope this email finds you well and happy. I've been watching your Bhakti talks, and I'd like to ask you two questions that are very important to me. I believe life itself is a spiritual journey, and that every action of ours, or should be, an offering to the divine, to God, and also a service to raise the consciousness of our planet. Now, because of this, the questions that I hold in my heart are: what is the purpose of romantic relationships in our spiritual path? And do soulmates and twin flames exist? Do we have a divine counterpart? Great question. So, I'm going to talk about, I'll talk about romantic relationships, and then I'll talk about this whole concept of a soulmate, or even a twin flame, and where that comes from, perhaps a little bit as well. So first of all, everyone's in a different stage of life, right? So, we're in different stages of life and of growing our relationship to God. When you're young, when you're perhaps in the phase of life where you might be married or have children, when you're older and say in retired life, maybe even when you're closer to death. And in India, there was what was called the Varna ashram system, which speaks to these different stages and different ashrams, different sort of temple modes that you might be in if you take seriously to the path of bhakti. And even if you're not, say, an initiated monk, these stages ring true as almost like archetypal stages of life through which we have to learn to cultivate our relationship with God differently and sensitively according to the time, place, and circumstance of that stage of life. So, romantic relationships for a lot of people are going to constitute part of the ashram of midlife. Say later youth into adulthood and through adulthood. And it's not just romantic relationships for a lot of people, though not all. Romantic relationships will come alongside of parenting. So that sometimes that's called the grihastha ashram, which refers to a phase of life where you're going to be cultivating bhakti, you're going to be cultivating love of God through practice, through sadhana. But you're going to be doing it with a spouse or a significant other, or maybe several. And, we all have different karmas, right? But you may very well, a partner very well play a role in that. So the ideal purpose of spiritual life within, the way that the Shastras outline our spiritual path and the best way to utilize each stage of life is that our spiritual, our relationships should be allied to our spiritual goals, which means the number one biggest thing that we consider is that not only am I attracted and, love this person, have that romantic connection, but also is this person, dedicated to the same things I am? Is this person putting love of God at the center of their life, at the center of their daily experience? People don't have to be in identical places or have identical ways of doing things or relating to God necessarily, but to be able to share that priority, that it's the center of our relationship, that it's the center of our home if we choose to have one, like a family or whatever. That's probably the number one thing. And why is that there? Because for many of us, although our desire should be for communion with God, and that should be our highest desire, many of us are not, we're still in this worldly plane because we have different desires, and we're not going to get rid of those, through repression. It's not a good thing. So, in some ways I look at the Catholic Church and I see some of the problems that the clergy has had at times. And I don't mean this as a criticism. It's just a truth. The clergy at times have had problems with this because many people who become priests have unresolved, sexual romantic desires for other human beings. They need intimacy and physical touch. They need closeness, So it's very important in bhakti that we be very honest with where our desires are. I have a desire for a romantic connection with someone else. I have a desire to, be cherished and love someone in a committed, relationship or whatever the case might be, right? So if we're honest with ourselves about that, then these stages, these different ashrams are meant to take that desire and marry it as closely as possible to the path of bhakti. So that means, first and foremost, having partners in our lives that share love of God or prioritizing spiritual life and spiritual practices every day. That's more the center of the relationship. That's the two people having the one thing in common that gives health and vitality and spiritual transcendental relevance to the relationship. So that's the number one role that spiritual relationships play is, hey, I have these desires, but I might as well try to find a spiritual context in which they can, play out and exercise themselves, and do that in a healthy way where two people are also, not only satisfying each other and our material desires for sexual happiness or, romantic intimacy and things like that, but that we're spiritualizing them as much as possible. So that's kind of the broad answer to what's the purpose of romantic relationships in our spiritual path. Romantic relationships, when they have spiritual life and love of God at the center, are a part of how we move through the karma. And many of us still feel, hunger. We still resonate with the previous experiences of love or difficulties in love or the desire to have something fulfilled through another human being in this kind of romantic dynamic. So, God doesn't say, oh, that's evil, that's bad. God says, yeah, just do it, but spiritualize it. Dovetail this relationship with spiritual life as much as you can. So I think that's the broad answer that, I've understood and my teachers have taught me and so forth. Of course, a romantic relationship that doesn't have that isn't bad or evil either. It's just that those relationships are harder to dovetail into spiritual life. And like any other form of material desire or aversion, attachment, and impermanence that we experience in the world, those relationships that don't share spiritual life are going to tend, in their final summation, they're going to tend to teach us about why we need spiritual life, why we need a relationship that has God at its center. So those relationships are often painful for the person who is spiritual and with someone who is not, or for the person who maybe both people aren't on that path at all. And in some ways that's easier, but those relationships over time, they're not evil. They're filled with lessons that eventually bring the soul, like all other experiences, to saying, whether it's a romantic relationship or it's a great career or it's the best, being the best parent or whatever other way we try to artificially measure success or happiness, we realize in time that those things they don't do it. And when we realize that, but maybe we haven't gotten to the point yet where I'm ready to become a monk, let's say, more a fully, completely absorbed in spiritual life and maybe not needing or wanting family or marriage or whatever the case might be. We're not there yet. So there's a place where we can still allow for that desire to exist, but dovetail it closely to spiritual life. So that's our answer in Bhakti. In terms of whether or not soulmates and twin flames exist, there is no mention, in terms of the Bhakti tradition of there being twin flames or soulmates, like one specific person that you're supposed to be with or something like that. I would say that while it's a very romantic notion, doesn't really fit in with the metaphysics of what Bhakti presents. So, and I'll try to explain why. And this isn't to dump on the feeling or what I want to say, the imaginal depth and beauty of such an image. It's just, does it literally exist metaphysically or not? I don't think so. The reason for this is that the only twin flame, the only soul counterpart to our soul that's described in the Shastras is God, right? So our real twin flame is God. Our real missing other half, is the soul's most intimate, eternal, like romantic connection is with God. And so that's what's focused on. And even if such things did exist, they would only be temporary. So there wouldn't be some kind of eternal lover's bond between jivas, meaning embodied souls. There would be maybe, I think it's probably very common that souls re-encounter one another, throughout many lifetimes. I'm speculating right now. Or that, souls ancestrally repeat patterns or maybe even travel together in different groups or something like that. That would not be surprising to me in the least. But this notion of there being a one and only is really reserved for God. And everyone else that we meet, we should see as on that same path, that everyone's really looking for that kind of connection with God. And we can get really sidetracked if we start thinking, well, there's just one person out there for me and I have to find them before I'll be fulfilled or completed, because that can start to take the place of what God is doing for us spiritually. So Krishna plays that role. Interestingly, though, how is that made manifest in Krishna, in Krishna Lila, in Krishna's pastimes? It's manifested as Krishna and his divine consort, his intimate lover, his twin flame, Radha, right? And so I think that the idea of a twin flame, the image of it is as actually speaking to this feeling that there is a one and only that can satisfy us, and that's God. And Krishna is presented like that with a lover that no one else is like, that's their soulmates, no one else but these two. That's the picture of Radha and Krishna, but that is emblematic in a way. It has a metaphysical reality that's it has its own ontology, but it's emblematic as well of the soul's relationship with God. You're my one and only, and God saying to each individual, paradoxically, no, you're my one and only. So because that's the focus, I think that probably, and again, I'm just speculating here, but I think probably a lot of Bhakti practitioners, if presented with that idea, would say something similar. There might be someone that you're paired with in this lifetime that is a soulmate, in the sense of this is the person that you're destined to be with in this lifetime, and some things are divinely arranged, maybe even a couple of lifetimes. But the only true sense of twin flame or eternal soulmate is between the soul and God. And in that sense, we also realize there's so many different forms of relationships with God. There's so many every relationship with God is utterly unique as well. And so, there's room for everyone to have their twin flame be God. And that's what's so special about Bhakti. So anyway, I hope that this is, a good, I know it's not a complete answer, but hopefully it helps. I'm trying to say things that I've heard from my teachers, but other bhaktas out there who watch this, feel free to add your wisdom and understanding or correct me if I need it. So, all right, that's what I've got. And feel free to write with more questions if you have them. info@nightlightastrology.com. Put Bhakti question in the subject line. All right, until next time, Hare Krishna.